intern this year. Um, I'm really excited to have Andrew on board. It's Andrew O'Doherty, so I'm guessing there's some Irish or, yeah, on hand. So if you see Andrew stand up so they can put a name with the face. And I hear he's really, really smart, so I plan on learning a lot, especially as from the younger generation. So thank you and welcome, Andrew. Next item on the agenda is introduction of bills. Do we have any bill introductions today? I think we've got one. If we need to come back to that order of business, we will. All right. Everybody should have at their desk copy of the committee rules and the conferee rules. Does everybody have that? The biggest changes on the conferee rules are they took some of the COVID language out. Since we're not doing that anymore, you do have to be in the committee room to vote in committee. You can watch from your office, but you got to be in the room if you want to vote. One of the things that I did want to mention is on here it talks about it's at my discretion to allow testimony by live video conference. I'm very supportive of allowing our constituents to testify using video conferencing if it's an inconvenience to them. If we get to the point where some of our lobbyists are using it as a way to not come in and face questioning from the committee, I may look at it different. But if it's one of your constituents that lives, 100 miles away, that it's a big difficulty to get here, I'm very supportive of that. So don't let that sole discretion be anything to be concerned about. I also included a copy of the conferee rules. If you have a constituent that wants to present, it's best. We have our people that are professionals at this, but if you've got somebody at home that wants to present, we want to make it as comfortable and easy for them to take part in our democratic process as we can. So anyway, for your information. Next item on the agenda is Chris Wagner is going to talk to us a little bit about Kansas Open Meeting rules and Kansas Open Records rules. So, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will try and make this short and sweet because I assume most of you have gotten this in your other committees so far, but I just wanted to cover it for this committee's purpose. So KOMA is the Kansas Open Meetings Act, KORA is the Kansas Open Records Act, and we will begin with KOMA. KOMA applies to legislative and administrative bodies and agencies that either receive or expend public funds or are supported in whole or in part by public funds. The first kind of element for KOMA is whether a meeting exists. Well, I guess I'll say KOMA applies, what it requires is meetings being open to the public and notice of meetings being provided upon request. So again, first, what is a meeting? It's any gathering or assembly via any method of interactive communication that occurs at any location or social situation involving a majority of the voting members for the purpose of engaging in discussion of the business of the committee. So this is a 17-person committee. 9 of you make a majority. And so communications also include serial communications, emails. Again, what matters is if they're discussing the business of the body. So some common examples are social events or travel. If majority of this committee were to be together, talk about the weather, talk about chiefs, but just be careful not to discuss the business or any action of the committee. Social media or emails also would apply, so be careful about replying all to any emails that may discuss the business of the committee. However, that's not that doesn't apply to planning, planning of meetings and things of that nature. So first, also, what is an open meeting? Open means reasonable access to the public in light of the circumstances. Prior agenda may be put out, but if it's revised or anything, it should be revised in the same manner. And then second kind of requirement for providing proper notice, notice of meetings must be provided upon request. An agenda is not actually required by COMA, but must be made available upon request if there is an agenda. So that's COMA. Going into CORA, CORA's Kansas Open Records Act requires public records of a public agency to be open for inspection. So CORA applies to public agencies, again, those that are supported in whole or in part by public funds or any taxing subdivision of the state. CORA requests are generally handled or are handled by the official custodian of the records. So generally that would be the chair of a committee. And those CORA requests that are made by individuals need to be responded to within 3 days. If anyone ever gets a CORA request, please reach out to our office, reach out to me. We can help you respond to those. And then all public records shall be open for inspection. That means recorded information of the committee. There are certain exceptions under CORA. And again, if you get that request, the most important part is reach out to us. We can respond. So enforcement of COMA and CORA, anyone who knowingly violates the provisions of the acts could be subject to a civil penalty not to exceed $500 for each violation. There could be a settlement where a violator could be assigned to remedial classes or something to teach violators more about the acts. So we will try and prevent those as best as possible, and I'd stand for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Chris regarding CORA and COMA? Okay. You know, the biggest thing to remember is just be smart. If we're going to talk about committee business, we need to do it in this room. That being said, I do want to remind everybody to watch your mics. You know, we are, when the blue light's on your microphone or the guy down there has his on, you know, anything you can say will be heard. So sometimes when we're having a presentation, if you think it's all right, just make sure it's public comment. Okay. All right, next item on the agenda is going to be an informational presentation on Kansas railroads. And one of the things I want to encourage all of you guys to do, so, you know, we've got a number of different presenters today. Some of us live on the BNSF, some of us live on the UP, the CC, VR, Cimarron Valley Railroad, or a short line. Some of these informational meetings we're having early on are for especially our new members. So you learn who your contact people are if one of your constituents has a problem. And I can't tell you guys, all of you out there, how helpful you are to me as I work issues that my constituents have at home. And so thank you. I mean, sometimes we don't always get the answer that we want, but at least sometimes we do fix it and sometimes we're heard. So we're going to have a lot of those this week. So make sure you start to build those relationships so we can help our constituents. So the first presentation on railroads is going to come from Ty Dragoo with Smart Kansas. Ty, welcome to the committee.
Good. Got it. Okay. I'll repeat myself. Nope.
Oh, and I was told to give some more information. You know, for all of you, we are trying to do a paperless committee, so these handouts are on your S drive. If you don't know how to get to your S drive, maybe the guy next to you knows, or I can help you with it afterwards. Sorry about that, Ty.
No problem. All right. So I'll repeat. My name is Ty Dragoo. I represent SMART. For the conversation in this room, it's the railroad workers in the state of Kansas. We represent approximately 6,000 active and retired members in the state of Kansas, and that's everything from a conductor, a signalman, maintenance away, engineer, yard masters. We have some clerks. Basically, any agreement employee on a railroad that has an organized property. One of the things that I want to go over briefly, and we have other presenters behind me, and they'll talk about their railroads individually. We represent all of them, BNSF, Union Pacific, some, the Kyle Railroad, some short lines, Amtrak. We, as railroaders, have federal certifications. So when it comes to moving our freight from A to B in Kansas or through Kansas, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You have to have a federal license that requires you not be colorblind, physical standards testing, drug and alcohol, hazardous material response, all of those things that go into moving freight safely through the state of Kansas. Workers in the railroad industry don't necessarily have a 9-to-5 job. We always tell people in committee hearings, the infrastructure in the state of Kansas is our office. Our locomotive cab is our desk. We're out in the elements 24/7. A railroader gets a phone call Christmas Day, 4 a.m., he's expected to get on that train. This is not a normal job. It's a hard lifestyle. With that, though, there are federal rules and laws in place that keep railroaders kind of different from Social Security. We can retire when we're 60 years old. We don't pay into Social Security. We pay a Social Security percentage into the Railroad Retirement Board, but then we go above and beyond on our own, a little over 1% to make that retirement fund more lucrative for our job. We also have benefits that don't come from the state of Kansas, such as unemployment. Work comp is something that does not exist in the railroad industry. That's all handled through the Railroad Retirement Board if there's injuries, things of that nature. So hopefully none of you have ever had the situation where you've had to call the state unemployment office, but there's always an option that says, if you are a railroader, hit this number. Well, that basically sends you to the black abyss because the state of Kansas has nothing to do with that stuff. All of that is a federal program. One of the other things that I just want to kind of point out, we work really together, our management and labor, when there's things we agree on. Sometimes we have disagreements. You guys have seen those. But at the end of the day, we want to be in the room together. We want to be successful in this industry because when the railroad industry is doing good, our workers are doing good, right? They're doing good. We have more people getting a paycheck. And railroaders make good paychecks in this state. With that, I can stand for any questions later. Again, there'll be more presentations behind me, but we always appreciate the chairman allowing us an opportunity for Railroad 101 and making introductions at the State House.
Anybody have any questions for Ty at this time? I know I'll be glad to answer them at the end also. Seeing none, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Chairman.
Next on the agenda is Tom Bruno, representing the Kansas Railroad Association. Welcome to the committee, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman said, I'm Tom Bruno. I'm here on behalf of the Kansas Railroad Association. That association is made up of the Class 1s, which are BNSF, UP, and a couple others that have some minor operations in the state, and a variety of the short line railroads. So in your packet, if you have a hard copy or if you're looking at the S drive, that first sheet, there's a picture of the national railroad system. That's around 140,000 miles of total network of rail. The second page is a picture of the Kansas Railroad Network. That's over 4,700 miles of rail in the state. Kansas is very lucky to be a rail-rich state. Sorry, Ben, I stole your line. And yes, sir.
Can I interrupt just for a second? We don't have this as a PDF that we can show on the screens, do we? I just think it would help everybody. Would everybody like to see it on the screen, or are you guys good to just let him keep talking? Representing Delphi.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring to your attention, because you've talked about paperless, you've talked about the S drive. I've got a brand new PC. As of today, I'm finally starting to get access to these drives. I don't have access to the S drive. I don't have access to this paper. So be aware, and it's just because the new PC and the IT's been working on this thing, there's been issues with it. So at this point, I'm kind of running blind, and we need to have it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I sent some down here. I think there are some over there too.
All right, I just think everybody will get a lot more out of it if they can follow along on maps.
Yep.
All right,
All right, everybody good?
okay,
All
go
right.
ahead.
So that second map is the state of Kansas. As you can see, there's a lot of rail that's in the state of Kansas. And I am pretty new to this, so I've been digging in as I was preparing for this. I basically looked at what information would I like to know? What is the foundation of where I want to build from? And the first thing that I learned was safety. Safety is a priority of the railroads, all of them, class 1s and short lines. Accidents have declined since 2000 by 27%. Derailments, and when you hear the word derailment, there's a specific definition of that in the Federal Rail Act, that we have to report them all. Most of those derailments happen at low speeds in the rail yards. They're still reported. They have little to no impact on the community or the workforce, but those are down 30% since 2000. Employee injury accidents are down around 50%, and grade crossing accidents, which are a big concern to railroads because that's where we intersect with the general traveling public, those are down 25%. And very importantly, over 99.99% of all hazardous materials transported on rail reach their final destination safely without any incident. So that's where I started. And so I kept digging and I kept learning more. Railroads invest nationwide over $23 billion a year of their own funds into their infrastructure and their operations, whether it's their locomotives or their rolling stock. That's about 39 cents out of every revenue dollar, not profit dollar, revenue dollar. So almost 40% of all their revenues goes back into their operations to improve the safety and efficiency. And finally, the other big piece of information I learned while doing my research was railroads are the most fuel efficient way to haul freight over land. 1 ton of freight can travel 500 miles on 1 gallon of fuel, including biofuels, which some of our railroads are using nowadays. So to put that in perspective, that would mean if you want to replace railroads, it would take 83 million more trucks on our highways for all the freight that railroads carry for us nationwide. And for the state of Kansas, that's around 17 million trucks, and that would be around 4 times more fuel than what railroads use. So with that, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'm going to kick it over to Andy Williams with the BNSF, who can answer lots of questions as well.
Welcome to the committee, Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members. Yeah, my name's Andy Williams. I'm with BNSF Railway. I'm Executive Director of Public Affairs for Kansas and Colorado. I'm based at our headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, but I have a long history here in Kansas and attended the University of Kansas, and look forward to coming back to Topeka as often as I can because I don't have to stay in a hotel when I'm traveling. I just stay at my sister's house over in Lawrence, so I appreciate that. Some of you may or may not know that the Atchison Topeka Santa Fe Railway was started right here in Topeka, Kansas back in the 1800s by a gentleman from Pennsylvania named Cyrus K. Holliday, who came over looking for a way to start a place to start a railroad west to California. And he came down the rivers, he came down the Kansas River, and he got here to a turn in the river and stopped and wrote his wife a letter and said, I found the perfect place for us to launch our new venture, our new railroad. It's in Topeka, Kansas. And he went on to not only start the railroad, but he was the first mayor of Topeka. The land that this capital is actually built on is on land that was donated to the state by Cyrus K. Holliday. And there's even in this building, there's still a provision that if you ever wanted to move the capital, we'd get the land back as well as any improvements, which would mean we'd have a heck of a building to have a new headquarters in, I guess. So having said all that, yeah, it's just, Topeka and Kansas in general has always been a historical, important place for us. We have about 3,000 employees here in the state. Juxtapose that against the probably about 29,000 we have across the country in our network. Our network nationwide is 32,500 miles of track that we maintain and build ourselves. Here in Kansas, we've got close to 2,000 miles of track that we build and operate. Kansas is also important to us because we have our largest classification yard, which is in Kansas City, Kansas, and Argentine, is based there. We have one of our largest shops here. It's based here, right here in Topeka, where we overhaul locomotives and other equipment that needs to be replaced. And these buildings that some of you have been in are historic. They've been here since the 1800s, and we still maintain and operate them. We also opened up probably, I don't know, about 12 years ago, a innovative intermodal facility right outside of Edgerton, Kansas. It's our logistics park, Kansas City, which sits right on our Transcon. And when you say Transcon, it doesn't go all the way across the country, but we are a West Coast railroad. So goods coming in from Asia and other parts of the world come into the ports in California. They get on our track as well as UP, but I'm here to talk about ours. They go right up through Wellington, Kansas, up through El Dorado, basically follow I-35 up through Kansas City to LPKC and then on to Chicago. It's our busiest line. We probably have over 100 trains a day that operate on that line. And when Cyrus K. Holliday started the railroad, his vision was to go all the way to California. And that we had that success. But of that Transcon, the busiest line, there were 50 miles that had not been double tracked along that entire route. And those 50 miles were through the Flint Hills. And part of the reason for them not being double tracked was why are the Flint Hills there? Because of all the limestone. You don't plow up the surface because there's rock there, and it's very expensive and laborious to do that kind of work. Well, we just finished this year double tracking. It's been a 6-year project. So while that was going on, you might imagine 100 trains coming and hitting an area that was under construction. So trains were diverted around up through Sedgwick, Newton, and other areas while that work was going on. Now the Transcon is whole. You have directional flow of traffic north-south, and it's just whipping. Traffic's just like an interstate, moving right along, which should reduce grade crossing issues that had popped up along Sedgwick. That was a big issue with former Senator Carolyn McGinn, as well as some folks in Newton and elsewhere. We look forward to being here in Kansas from here on out. Topeka and Kansas is an important part of our network. And we look forward to answering any questions that you may have after everybody's done their presentation.
Thank you very much. Ben, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ben Jones. I'm Senior Director of Public Affairs for Union Pacific for the great state of Kansas, and then I also cover Missouri and Oklahoma. Andy started off with a history lesson. Also start off with the history lessons. The railroads are kind of rich in that. You know, our history dates back to President Lincoln in 1861 when he signed the Pacific Railway Act, creating the Union Pacific and Southern Pacific, which basically competed to build the first transcontinental railroad. And those two companies met in Promontory Point in Utah, and eventually Union Pacific, Southern Pacific would merge and come together. So I always appreciate the history that we have. But to dial it even a little bit closer to home, you know, our line, as you see on the map there, part of it runs from Kansas City out to Colby and Colorado. But like many places in Kansas, you know, for some reason, every 45 miles there seems to be a town. And a lot of that dates back to the railroads, because that's the mileage that was needed to fill the steam engines. So, you know, our history is your history, and we share that. And we do look to be partners with the communities. As the chairman said to begin, you know, part of why we're here today is make that introductions, because there's many ways that we can partner with your communities just beyond what happens in this building, but what happens at home. To provide a quick overview of Union Pacific in the state of Kansas, A couple of our major customers are the GM plant in Fairfax. We also serve Fort Riley, and we have someone here with the grain feed. Randy's here. I'm proud to say Kansas is our largest grain state of what we move in and out of the state. So the ag industry is huge for us, and we're more than happy to support them in what they do. Some of our major employment centers would be Marysville, Kansas City, Parsons, Coffeyville, Harrington, and then out in Abilene as well. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but as you could hear from Ty's presentation, there are a lot of railroaders out there. Imagine if we took a poll here, imagine a few of you might have had a grandfather or somebody else in your family work for the railroad along the way. So again, our history is your history. Getting back to kind of areas where we can work together, besides what happens here in this building, is economic development. That's something obviously is important to us and it's important to your communities. We have folks here, our industrial development folks, I know BNSF and others have, that will sit down with, if you have a business coming or thinking about coming to your community, and we'll sit down with them and say, hey, here's what it will take to get rail served. And I encourage you to have that conversation with the railroads early, and here's why. A lot of times folks look at the railroads, oh, you're just like a public utility, you'll just run a line right off the railroad. We'll talk to you once the project's done. We have all this other stuff taken care of. Well, sometimes it's not that simple. It depends on kind of what type of freight network goes through your community, how well it's traveled, and based on that will determine what kind of switches you need, how much additional track that you'll need in order to create that on-ramp onto our interstate or our mainline railroads. So again, if you hear of something happening in your community, reach out to me, reach out to Tom or Pat Hubble and say, hey, they're thinking about coming here, or we're in line for this project. Who do we need to talk to? And we'll get you in contact with the right folks. The other way we work with communities is through our community giving. The Union Pacific Foundation, I know BNSF also has a foundation. We specifically give to the communities that we serve because that's where our employees live and their families live and work as well. So, for the Union Pacific Foundation, we open that up typically in April, and thanks. And that will run. Applications usually run to the end of June, and then awards are made later in the summer. And then we also have community dollars in which we can help with, whether there's a festival going on, something happened with a local school that's important to the community. That's kind of places that we can also provide additional support. And then the chairman spoke about it at the beginning. The other place we can work with you is if you are having issues with the railroads, every once in a while there might be a block crossing. and that's where Andy and I are here to work with you. We'll work with dispatching, we'll work with local operations. We'll figure out why that's happening. Sometimes it could be a mechanical issue on that specific train. Sometimes it's work related on what's happening in the rail yards. Sometimes it's just based on where dispatch are having train meets. And sometimes rail traffic will change, whether it's in bad weather or what have you, that will change the pattern of what people see in the community. So reach out to us. We'll do the best we can, to solve it, but more importantly, be able to solve that, or at least get the answer that you're looking for your constituents. So with that, that's kind of best ways that I know I try to work with your communities, and we'll look forward to answering questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Our next presenter today is online, and it's Bruce Carswell. He's the Senior Vice President of Cimarron Valley Railroad. For those of you that are new to the committee, we have the traditional mainline railroads that we think about that go, interstate. And then we have the short lines that, especially in my part of the state and some of the other rural areas of the state, provide a very important function, helping us get grain to market. So with that, welcome to the committee, Bruce. Is he on? Bruce, I think you're muted possibly. Is it all right on your end?
Yeah, I double-clicked the button evidently. Sorry about that. Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, I'm Bruce Carswell, here representing Shortline Railroads and the Cimarron Valley Railroad. We've got a over 200-mile short line down in southwest Kansas. Our easternmost point is in Dodge City, and then we operate to both the Colorado and Oklahoma borders. Cimarron Valley is a fairly typical short line railroad. We've actually been fairly successful over the last 10 years at growing our business. The state has definitely been a participant in helping that occur. I'll give a few more details on that as I go through my presentation, but there is 13 short line railroads in the state of Kansas. There's also 2 additional switching and terminal railroads in the larger metropolitan areas. We operate just under 2,000 miles of track, so a good portion of the state rail mileage is actually operated by short lines. Short line is essentially a first mile, last mile feeder into the larger national rail network operated by the Class 1s who you've heard from earlier. Most of the short lines in Kansas were created, as a result of deregulation that happened at the federal level in the 1980s with the Staggers Act. That act allowed the larger railroads to, much more easily shed low density, cost challenged and revenue challenged rail lines. Kansas had a number of those that were essentially spun off or abandoned. Cimarron Valley is one of those. Those lines were taken over in the most part by, smaller organizations with an entrepreneurial focus and trying to bring those railroads back to a viable status. By definition, our first mile, last mile feeder serves almost exclusively rural parts of the state. So, but for the short lines, there would be a much more challenging transportation picture for shippers and receivers in those rural communities. The state of Kansas has done a great job in supporting and enhancing the rail industry. KDOT, we work often with them across several different programs. And I'll give you some examples of those just for what we've had with the Cimarron Valley. So one is the Rail Service Improvement Program. It's gone through a couple of iterations over the years, but I can tell you that, Cimarron Valley 15 years ago was in danger of being abandoned. It, had a fairly challenging situation from a traffic base. Revenues were not sufficient to keep the capital investments needed for, a costly infrastructure situation that railroads have. So state of Kansas, KDOT, through the rail, what that time was a rail service improvement program, or whatever its former name was, partnered also with a set of county organizations with the 5 counties that we operated in, invested $15 million into the Cimarron Valley. And we've essentially never looked back. We have continued to build upon that. Our traffic has grown by double in the last 10 years, almost threefold over the 15 years. And but for that rail investment that the public-private partnership made, the railroad wouldn't exist now for the southwest part of the state. Another program we use and has been very helpful is the Short Line Tax Credit Program. It incentivizes us to make additional infrastructure investment. KDOT also has an economic development program, and that helps us when it comes time for connecting in new customers. Most recently, we worked with KDOT to help build some rail infrastructure at the relatively new renewable diesel facility that was built by Seaboard Energy in Hugoton. That renewable diesel facility is one of the first in the country supplying renewable diesel around the country, and definitely was a boon to that part of rural Kansas with significant investment. I think $350 million was the last figure I heard on that plant. But rail was a key part of what they needed, and the economic development program assisted in making sure that that project moved forward. And then lastly, Kansas has been very, very helpful and supportive on applying for federal programs. Most recently, we were successful in receiving a grant from the Federal Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program, otherwise known as CRISI. State of Kansas participated in that through KDOT and made an investment, and ultimately we were successful in receiving nearly a $50 million total project cost grant from USDOT. As you've heard in some of the earlier testimony, safety is very important to the rail industry. Shorelines are no different. It's a very big focus of ours. Cimarron Valley just went one full year without a single injury, which is a pretty notable achievement for heavy industry to do that. So again, we are a critical first mile, last mile feeder into the national rail network. Without us, cost of transport would definitely increase. More trucks on the highway, which is not good for stretched county and state highway budgets. And our short line there, based out of Santana, same story. If you ever need anything, we're here to help. We'll, whether it's economic development or questions about rail operations, impacts that we may be having to constituents or communities, we'll be happy to help. And with that, I'll turn it back and be free for questions.
All right, committee. Do we have any questions for any of our presenters? Representative Hall Heisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if I may, I have two questions for two different people. The first is Ty.
Hey,
How are you?
good. How are you?
Last time we chatted, it was about the two-man rule, and
Yeah.
had a somewhat good conversation on that. Bumpy at times, but we had a conversation. Where is that within the state of Kansas, and what is that looking like federally now?
So I think in the state of Kansas, it's promulgated as a rule. And the reason that the state, in my opinion, and our organization's opinion, was able to make that rulemaking is because the federal agency hadn't made rulemaking on it. So to answer your question, the federal government has made rulemaking on it now. So now instead of just Kansas, it's every state in the United States has a two-person reg.
And if I remember right, the governor issued an executive order on it. Is that correct, or what? How did she?
Oh, it went through rules and reg. It wasn't executive.
It went through rules.
Yeah.
Oh no, she did. That's right. I get it confused because she did a big signing on it, and that's where things went sideways. So, I forgot what my follow-up question was going to be on that. I had it there, and then I lost it. So, thank you. That's good. That update, and we can chat again on it soon.
Yeah, you bet.
Yep. Second question was for any of the members of the railroad industry that would. I feel I wouldn't be doing my job as a representative if I didn't bring up railroads in my district, railroad crossings, switches, delays impeding traffic. That's actually one of the biggest complaints I get, because I have one right in my district that hits typically almost close to rush hour there along South Meridian. Not sure what line that is, Pawnee Meridian kind of area. Is there any willingness or technological advances on helping and address this issue? Because it is a huge issue. Wichita. Yeah.
So there's, both railroads operate through there as well as a number of short lines. BNSF specifically, as I'd mentioned before, was submitting a lot more traffic through there up until this year. While we worked on our transcon, a number of years ago, and Pat Hubble, who was actually not able to be here this afternoon, worked with, and this is way before I came to the railroad, worked with the city of Wichita. And if you notice downtown Wichita and other areas, the track's elevated. Yeah. And that was, the plan was to move that out past 19th Street, have it elevated all the way through there. But as the project was going, for whatever reason, and Pat can probably answer this for you, the mayor at the time decided he didn't want to extend that out that far. So part of it is we have an obligation to meet customers. And so there are customers there. It's not a big switching yard for us. We do a lot of that stuff up in Newton. I can't speak for the Union Pacific. There is occasions when traffic going north, there have been problems with mechanical stuff and the trains had to stop. And unfortunately, it's at rush hour and that does cause big problems. But traffic through Wichita in general, from the BNSF perspective, should decline. So block crossings in that area just shouldn't happen. Also, trains.
Hopefully I could take that back to my constituents.
Absolutely.
I cracked down on you guys and got that fixed for 'em.
Yeah, feel free to.
Now, what happens in Newton is that's
Yeah,
Newton's
that's
problem.
right.
Their representative can fight for them.
Yeah.
I don't care. But the Wichita, that's the
Yeah.
one I'm.
And we used to have a really big rail safety program with the sheriff of Wichita. And we would do officer on the train events where we would have the sheriff's department and the state troopers, I believe, were involved. And it's actually a national organization called Operation Lifesaver. And we would put folks in the cab, officers in the cab of our vehicles, and they would go up and down the tracks in Wichita. And it was alarming at the number of incidents where people would go around gates or race to beat trains. And so the perspective when we were doing those kinds of things from the public is, oh, you need to be a lot safer around railroad tracks. There are actual laws around what you can and cannot do. That program has kind of declined over the last 8 years. When I say declined, just isn't routine like it used to be. So that's opened up another avenue or another opportunity for people to develop their own opinions about what's going on. It only takes one time being stuck by a train at a crossing to get a bad taste in your mouth about it.
Especially if it's rush hour.
Yeah, especially if it's rush hour. It does us no good to leave trains stopped. We try to move our customers' freight as quickly and as efficiently as we can, and we do not stop trains on crossings unless it's absolutely necessary. It may be a mechanical issue on that particular train. It may be 10 miles up the road. There's an issue, whatever. But if it's unsafe, we have to stop. And if it's going to be for more than 30 minutes, there has to be a judgment call made and it's made by our crews. A matter of, do you break that train and let cars go through, or do you keep it together? And people would say, well, naturally just break the train. But that's deceptive, because when you break a train, there's federal regulations that require you walk the train and do brake inspections. So it can actually take longer in some cases to break a train and then put it back together. So it's a judgment call. From a crew perspective, from a railroad perspective, sometimes it feels like a no-win situation, but I guarantee you there's nobody sitting there with the train just sitting on a crossing without there being a reason.
I appreciate that answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Del Perdang.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to run through. One is pretty similar to the previous one, but who is it that actually regulates the trains? Is that a fed or state issue?
It's both. I mean, the federal rules are that thick, the Kansas rules are that thick.
Right.
So, I mean, you have all agencies, federal and state, have rules.
So when it goes specifically to the railroad crossings, I've gotten several calls from the fire chief out of Preston, Kansas, just north of Pratt, where trains will block multiple miles of intersections for 2-3 days at a time. They've had instances where people have died because they could not get EMS to them. They've had houses burned down because they could not get fire trucks to them. Who's responsible?
It's a hard thing, and again, I kind of know where this is going to start going, and I hope that doesn't happen, because we're in here as friends today with 101. We are both on the same page, but sometimes we just disagree. When it comes to emergency responses and getting from A to B over that railroad crossing, it's not a crew decision on whether that train's broke or not. We don't do anything unless dispatch and management tells us to do it. Because if we go out and do what we want to do and they don't like it, we're looking at discipline charges. So that is 100% a management decision. Crossings being open, that is obviously a concerning thing. I do know having those two individuals there at a minimum expedites those crossings being cut when they decide to cut those crossings. So it is just vital that that federal regulation, that's now a federal regulation, remains in place. And Kansas had the good foresight in doing that before that. So Andy, Ben, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, it's a bin.
Preston, Kansas, that is a Union Pacific line. I don't have any specifics on that, but I'd be happy to work with you and then work with our operating dispatch
Okay.
on that, especially.
It's not
if
so
it-
much me. I'm just relaying because
Sure.
I get calls on this, and if
Yeah.
I could get someone at least to follow up with them.
That's-
And I don't think it's quite the issue it was, but it still happens out there. Because I think they put another parallel line to maybe alleviate some of that issue.
Yeah, we have put a number of sidings along that corridor, basically between Liberal and Harrington to help with that, so you have directional flow.
Mhm.
But in general, if you do get blocked crossings, definitely feel free to reach out to me. But the thing to do in real time, especially if you're talking to your EMS folks, is there's an 800 number at each rail crossing.
Okay.
And that goes into our dispatch center, which then communicates with dispatch. So it goes to our emergency hotline, then they'll communicate with the dispatcher, especially if it's a real-time emergency. And I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can, maybe, that's something we could provide the committee for all the railroads, or what are the emergency numbers? So if you know which ones are in your districts, you know, hey, did you call them? If it's after the fact, let me reach out to somebody, see if I can help you.
Sure, fair answer. Next question. This is more of, I don't know if you have any statistics on it or if it's opinion, but we look at pipeline versus transporting by rail. Which is the safer way to do this? And I'm sure it's probably on a case-by-case basis, but you look at crude being shipped, or the various petroleums and stuff. It is pipeline versus rail.
We're not shipping as much crude as we did, let's say, 10 years ago, because pipelines have taken over. And a lot of times, as you know, transporting anything, it's an economic decision by the producer. So I think they've found that to be somewhat more efficient from a cost standpoint. But there are times where that then gets, for various reasons, we will transport that. And you heard Tom earlier say 99.9% of our hazmat shipments make it to their destination without incident. So from a safety perspective, you know, I think rail is always a safe mode of transportation compared to other over-the-road ways. And so we would encourage them to look at rail.
Sure. And Amtrak, I really didn't hear too much said on that, but where does that come into play? I assume they're using your rails. When I say that, the bigger operations, is it who regulates when they go through, or how does that play out? Who's got priority for the tracks and that kind of thing?
Amtrak has priority. This goes back to kind of the agreement that was made. The rail industry used to be heavily into the passenger business, but that's when mail moved by rail. And once that started going by truck, it was no longer profitable. So that's how Amtrak came to existence, was basically agreement saying, hey, we're going to get out of this, but we'll support Amtrak. So they have priority. And, you know, I know on the federal level, they look at that very closely on how that performance is going. And then I think they have to negotiate with the railroads on if they want to add additional service, change service. So we have on at least our relationship with Amtrak up in our dispatch center, we have a couple of people just dedicated to Amtrak. Make sure that we're keeping that on-time performance where it needs to be.
Okay. And last question, if I may. Trains are already EVs, if you will. They're electric vehicles, plain and simple. Obviously, they operate off diesel, but is there experimentation or anything going on throughout with like fuel cells or alternatives such as hydrogen production, or not production, but usage in there to power the generation portion of it?
Sure. You heard Tom talk about us transferring a little bit more to biodiesel when it comes to fuel, but other fuel alternatives, there's always research going on. There's a whole research center, what is it called, TTI, out in Pueblo, out in Colorado, where all the rail industry, rail companies come together and kind of joint venture to research different types of technology. And that's something that's always being looked at. I can't talk specifically which ones, but we're always looking for the most cost-efficient way to safely move freight.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear more about that in the future. I thought there was some experimenting where they actually trying fuel cells on a big scale, but you've got the room to fit them there, so, okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you're up there. So I believe it's Union Pacific that goes through Leavenworth along the river. So I'm trying to get a bridge done. And I understand that well, KDOT came here last year and said that they were working through rights of way. Do you have any kind of update on, like, have they talked to Union Pacific? Has Union Pacific already worked out all the issues with building a bridge over your line?
I haven't heard anything specifically on that. I can look into it and talk to our public projects people.
Okay, if you could, I'd be really, really
Yeah.
interested to see where we're at because I want a bridge.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Andy, did you have something you wanted to add to one of those?
Back to the question about regulations, and we're really primarily regulated by the federal government. They decide, they're the ones that say sound the horn, 2 shorts, a long and a short at every crossing. There's been, our trains are now, most of them on most routes are positive train control, which means that, if you don't sound the horn, it's going to do it automatically for you. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of first responders, and you say in block crossings, there's an app now that we've come out, which is becoming kind of revolutionary in the industry. It's called Ask Rail, and you may or may not have heard about it. But Ask Rail is an app that is not available off the shelf to just anybody. You have to be a first responder or someone in that line of work, and then you get approved. And once you have that app, fire departments can, all of our emergency numbers, every railroad's Class 1 railroad number is on there, and they can just call the BNSF hotline, and they can get through and explain their situation. We are actively encouraging, when I say we, the industry, and we're working in some other states, and Colorado being one of them, where we are asking that their state emergency management have that app available in their dispatch centers, and all of their dispatchers in every town where a railroad operates have that. That way, if there's ever an accident, they can look at a car, see a number that's on the side of a rail car, punch it into their app, and it tells them what's in that car and what's in the entire consist. And so we have individual firemen that are downloading that, and police, but we'd like to see it in the dispatch. So when somebody pulls up to a crossing and it's blocked, they can call dispatch and say, hey, can you get a hold of the railroads quickly? And it frees them up to do whatever they need to do. So I would encourage you to take that back. Ask Rail. Our hazmat team would be happy to come and talk to you guys and introduce you to the app. I've got tons of literature I'm happy to send out as well.
Andy, well, does the UP do that also?
Yes, all railroads. It was developed by the Association of American Railroads and distributed out. You just got to go through an approval process. Takes an individual about a month to get that. An individual first responder. You and I couldn't go and get it off the shelf. But if you're a dispatch center or a sheriff's department, you can get it almost turnkey the same day or the next day.
And the short lines do it also?
The short lines, as I know, are not involved, but are planning to become involved. So.
We're going to take you to the end and let some of the other people get their questions out. Is it just a response? All right.
I was just, that specific app, is it a free to them, or is it a specific cost?
Yeah, it's, once you've been approved, it's free.
Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for anyone. I am kind of curious, when I've been in Western Kansas, we hear a lot about the need for increased north-south connections or short lines for grain transport, and I was wondering if those discussions are happening at all. I don't know if that is something that's being considered among railroads, but I'd be interested to know. I think it's also a way potentially to save water in the future if we can import more corn, for example, to our feed yards.
So Governor Collier, with the first T-Works, put SMART as a member of the T-Works Planning Commission. And we're very much supportive of the Short Line Rail Safety Improvement Fund. And our position on that is and you heard the presenter from the short lines on their capital projects, but our dog in that fight is when they're doing these things, let's see safety improvements and upgrades. So I think the industry looks at that fund as access, what you're talking about, and it's been a stellar program. I haven't heard any short line say that it's a bad thing. If anything, I would probably be up here advocating it needs to be expanded. But our dog in that fight is not only that expansion, but when state monies are going towards these improvements, we like to see safety improvements enhanced with those construction projects.
And if I could interject here, from the shoreline perspective, I agree wholeheartedly. And, you know, we actually have had, inbound corn, over the last, couple of, harvest seasons as one of our major traffic flows. So that is occurring. We've got, 2 large shuttle facilities out there on the Cimarron Valley that are receiving those. We have a project going on right now, which I didn't speak to, but, we are actually under that program building a siding outside of Dodge City to help facilitate, you know, the increased traffic that we've had and minimizing the amount of time that trains have to sit waiting for each other coming and going out of Dodge City, and it has an impact on block crossings in Dodge City. So, you know, that state rail improvement fund is definitely assisting with those sorts of investments. Many of our investments over the last 15 years have gone towards rail safety, improved rail weight, replacing old 85-pound rail with newer 115 or 130-pound rails. So definitely we can see those programs as very beneficial, both with capacity as well as rail safety.
A quick follow-up, if I may. I'm new to the committee. I have heard about the Short Line Rail Safety Improvement Fund. Is that currently at $10 million? Part of me was also wondering if that's a fund that could be expanded or if there's increased need for that type of funding at the state level.
It is my belief it is $10 million, and when it was signed, and I'd have to look at the year, but I believe that there was a 7-year markup on that. So I can't remember when it was enacted. I want to say 3 years ago, $10 million for 7 years. Please don't hold me to that, but it's around that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Representative Goddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I think, is a follow-up from Representative Duplerdang's question about Amtrak. I think I've got a pretty good handle on where Amtrak runs and what it does. But my question has to do with the future. What kind of things are going on for example, passenger rail service out of Wichita into Oklahoma? You know, and what kind of input do the rail companies have on, you know, bringing that to fruition?
It kind of piggybacks on the question that she just asked about north-south lines and a shortage of, or a need for more north-south lines. It's very expensive to build rail. And so to build north-south lines just to serve wheat, you've got to have a business model with a return on investment that makes it worthwhile. And that's oftentimes why you get state money that comes in to help, because it's not there. We do have Amtrak operating our lines in Kansas, the Southwest Chief, as you know. There is a big push to want to get it from Newton down to Oklahoma City. I think the railroad, it'd be on our line, BNSF line, and we are certainly not opposed to that. But it takes money to add that line to have that capacity. And so a good example is what we're doing in Colorado right now. The Governor Jared Polis is very, very interested in having front range passenger rail, and his vision is actually for it to go all the way from Cheyenne down to Trinidad, all along the front range, which is, you know, there's been estimates 40 billion, you name it. So what he's done is decided to do chunks. So this last round of grant applications, he worked with the feds and was able to get money for some key grade steps across highways, as well as some key sidings, almost all the way up to Boulder. So I wouldn't be surprised if once that's in the ground that service starts. And then the next would be go from Boulder up to Fort Collins. But it's a matter of what are the priorities of Amtrak as well. And so Amtrak has their corridors ID'd, and I'm not sure if that one is on that priority list or not, but the one in Colorado was pretty high, and there was a population base to support that. And so, and his ability to attract funds to help with those, I think it's 3 flyovers over main highways, as well as sidings that allow for freight trains to pull over to get out of the way of them. So the same thing can happen. It's more complicated on what you're talking about because you got 2 states and a multiple number of communities. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but I think Amtrak would be big supporters of it because it does connect you to the Texas market, which is huge. And it would give them a line like from Chicago, all the way from New York, actually, down to Texas. So we have no opposition. In fact, we have a passenger rail team that's headed up by Jim Tylek, who meets with them regularly, and it's in discussions. I have heard passenger rail advocates point the fingers at freight railroads and say they don't want it, but that's simply not the case. It may not be huge, but we do make some money off of Amtrak service, and it's just a matter of people seeing a line and saying, well, there's not a train on it now. Why don't we put a passenger train? Well, wait 30 minutes and there will be a train. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ty?
Briefly, just to follow up on that, the governor's budget has $15 million outlined for 4 years, or a total of $60 million to expand the Kansas portion of Amtrak.
Thank you. People pointing fingers at one another. If they just stop pointing fingers, and you get a much more harmonious outcome, like the old cowboy says. So.
That's exactly what happened.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hobson, did you have, or was you just trying to help Andy out?
I just wanted to get, Andy was trying to get his response, so, yeah.
Representative Minix?
With all due respect to my urban legislators, I represent an area in the West where seldom is heard a discouraging word. I want to thank the Union Pacific this last fall for bringing the 4014 steam engine through on the lines. I witnessed a small town of about 250 people swell to 4,000. And my grandfather was a section foreman at several places in Kansas along the UP line. We really appreciate the rail service that we do have in Western Kansas, and thank you guys very much.
Representative Van Helden?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I represent the 26th district, which is South Johnson County. We've got 2 rail spikes. So our 2 largest industries are located right next to the railroad. So we're the beneficiaries of the railroad in that regard. Flip side to that is we're a highly residential community. So if you had any information, last year we applied and received a grant for the railroad crossing elimination study. I was wondering if you could just kind of walk through. I think the study is beginning in 2025, but just the process of what.
I'm happy to get you the right person. I'm not the right person to talk about. I've been peripherally involved. Is that 119th or? Yeah.
199th.
99th, yeah. I knew it was a 9 in there. The city had supported it, and I think there's been some waffling back and forth. I'm not sure I understand, but I can certainly have our public projects person get in contact with you. Olathe has been an area where, as you have correctly pointed out, and all through Kansas City, residential, and that just happens to be the Transcon going through there on one side, so it's the busiest line. And then on the other side, you have what's our Fort Scott sub, which comes out of Argentine, downtown Kansas City, basically, and follows, kind of skirts the state line south. And you see a lot of coal traffic going on that. And so there's gradual improvements on all of those. And but I don't feel prepared to wade into the 199th Street process study at this point. But I'm happy I can have someone to get in contact with you and make sure you get all your answers.
So do you have any information though on the railroad crossing or the railroad crossing elimination grant, like how that?
Well, it's community decides with the railroad that, yeah, this would be a good candidate to closed. I think this is a flyover or?
There's actually 4 different intersections they're studying. So in my district, there's 7 different, the railroad goes right through the heart of my district.
Yep.
And like I said, it's highly residential. So, so it's basically where the city is meeting the country now, right? So it's taken 150 years, but now we're there. And so, yeah, so we're just looking at, what are our options. And when this was presented at city council, I think they were saying an overpass is 20 million, underpass is 80 million. These are big numbers, right? Like, we can't do that at every one. But I was just curious what the criteria is to make a determination and then.
Well, oftentimes the criteria is what the city can afford or the owner of the roadway can afford. And we typically put in some money too. And I'll give you a good example. We're working with KDOT and the feds right now on, well, let's look at our Kansas City. Our Kansas City was the first city on our network. And this was probably about 15 years ago where we closed every crossing in town and built with federal grants, state grants, flyovers. So traffic flows through there much quicker. You don't have the train noise. You don't have block crossings because there are none. And the city manager, I think he's still there, would tell you it was the best thing that's ever happened to the state. And what you have to do is apply for grants, and the FRA gets involved, and we get involved, and there's diagnostics involved. But it's not something that the railroad comes out and says, "Hey, let's do this." And I can't remember the issues with 199th. I thought it was on and then it was off, and maybe it's back on, but there was some controversy about it, but I can't remember the details.
All right. Have I missed anybody? Anybody else have any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. And I would encourage those of you, if one of these railroads goes through your district and you want to follow up and get some contact information, hit them up about it. Committee, for the rest of the week, we're going to continue our 101 presentations tomorrow. We're going to have the Kansas Turnpike. So if you have any questions about cashless tolling, get those top of mind, or the 69 choice lanes. We'll also have a presentation from the Kansas Highway Patrol. I'm sure they'll have a focus on excessive speed. I think that's one of their legislative priorities, and distracted driving. Thursday, Secretary Reed with the Department of Transportation will be here. And I think Catherine, I see Catherine in the background. Catherine, can you stand up? Does everybody know Catherine? And I'm going to butcher Catherine's last name. Yeah. Anyway, Catherine is kind of our key contact person with the Department of Transportation. And can you find out what the dollar amounts on those short line improvement grants are? I think wasn't there 2 of them for $5 million apiece, and we added them together last year to make them 1 for 10, so that they were easier to access. But sometimes I don't remember things as clearly as I think I do. But anyway, Catherine can maybe get us that information for when Secretary Reed comes out. With that, committee, if the leadership of the committee will just stick around for a moment afterwards, we'll have a quick conversation about what we think's on the agenda for the following week. It's light so far, so we're going to have to find some work. So if there's nothing else for the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you.